Welcome to Kentucky Crossroads with Roger Ford. Here, you'll find lively discussion about the issues, unique communities, and fascinating people from across the Bluegrass State. Each week, we'll discuss our history and culture, as well as explore the unique places that make Kentucky so special. Now, join our host Roger Ford as we take a journey through the Bluegrass State and discover the stories that make us so unique.
Good day, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of Kentucky Crossroads. I'm your host, Roger Ford. Recently, the Kentucky General Assembly introduced House Bill 201, a bill that, if it becomes law, will expand the use of traffic ticketing cameras on Kentucky highways, with an initial deployment of these cameras in work zones. This bill was voted out of the Transportation Committee recently with only one vote. That's right. All the committee members, only one dissenting vote against this bill. The bill is promoted to increase highway safety in construction zones. It will start off with a pilot program as early as January 2024. However, in my opinion, this bill is more about getting more revenue for the state at the expense of our privacy and constitutional rights of each of us as individuals. On today's episode, we'll look at House Bill 201, the underlying agenda driving the push for traffic ticket cameras in Kentucky, and look at the overall state of the use of these cameras throughout the United States, as well as a discussion of their constitutional use and what citizens should do if they become a recipient of a citation from one of these devices. What is the underlying problem with House Bill 201? Aside from questions about its constitutionality in the use of these cameras for law enforcement, there are other problems that may be revealed as an underlying agenda for those supporting passage of House Bill 201. Supporters point to safety of highway construction workers as reason to support this bill. But there's language in the bill that leaves a gap between the posted speed limit in a work zone and the triggering threshold of when a driver would receive a ticket generated from a traffic camera. So let's start with the language in the bill that discusses speeders in the work zone. Currently, speeding violations in work zones is typically doubled for drivers going over the speed limit. And I have researched, and I don't think there's any threshold that has to be met. If you're going 1 mile over the speed limit, you're considered to be speeding. However, in House Bill 201, the threshold is up to 10 miles per hour over the posted speed limit in the work zone, meaning you won't receive a speeding ticket generated by one of these cameras unless you're going in excess of 10 miles over the speed limit. So there's a gap between the posted speed limit, and typically I see these zones where the speed limit is posted to either 35 or 45 miles an hour. So you can actually be going up to 10 miles an hour faster through the work zone and not be ticketed by one of these devices. Frankly, if safety were the one and only concern, then why would there be leeway in allowing for speeding in the work zone over the posted speed limit? Why shouldn't there be no discretion in that, or the discretion left up to the to an officer that's posted at the work zone, which is typical of the case many times now. You see state troopers or officers there in the beginning and end of a work zone. It goes without saying that we should all observe the speed limit in these work zones when workers are present or at any other time. Honestly, in many states, posted work zone speed limits are designated for those times only when work zone warning lights are flashing, meaning workers are present. And that encourages people to be more aware that we should observe the posted speed limit in that area and at that time. This isn't the case in Kentucky. We are left to guess if or when workers are present at the work site, day or night. This does create confusion, and this is something that should be addressed. So while those that advocate for these cameras to increase safety, they fail to look at ways to reform existing law to better protect workers. It may be that reform of current laws and regulations should be the first priority that improves on the safety of highway construction workers, and not passage of whole cloth new law that has gaps in the enforcement criteria. House Bill 201 is further flawed, in my opinion, in that by creating new law out of whole cloth, the bill creates a new method for issuing and processing citations through the transportation cabinet and not the local court system in the county in which you receive the citation. There's no mention given how this administrative work will be done, other than it says that the transportation cabinet should be given the power to propagate rules and regulations to administer this new law. It leaves one to wonder if this will be a remote transaction that burdens the driver by not being able to attend a local court hearing in place of having to travel hundreds of miles from remote areas of the state to Frankfort or some other location to contest the camera issued citation. Or will they simply be encouraged to go online and pay the fine? Further, House Bill 201 shifts the penalty from a civil fine against the driver, as it is now, decided in a court of law by a duly elected district or circuit judge, to a faceless bureaucrat or private contractor, and empowers that contractor or that bureaucrat to suspend the registration of the vehicle if the driver fails to pay the fine or challenge the citation within 30 days. Now a citation is given by in-person law enforcement officer, and all pertinent information is included on the citation: court date, if it's payable in advance, if traffic school is an option, all of that. This new process created by House Bill 201 will be dependent upon the haphazard mail system, both to receive the camera generated citation and to make sure the payment is delivered to the enforcement agency. Any breakdown in the process will result in delays and potentially suspension of your vehicle's registration, which will impact your ability to drive and to be covered by your auto insurance. House Bill 201 makes no mention of measures to address such instances should they arise. Another flaw is the language of House Bill 201, in that it is vague as to whether the pilot program will be administered by employees of state government or whether this pilot program will be contracted out to a private corporation in a private contract with a for-profit entity. The first rule in all of this is to follow the money. From the initial research that I've conducted, it shows the following private corporations are operating traffic systems throughout the United States, such as these traffic cameras for ticketing. Among these corporations, one is currently incorporated in Kentucky. That corporation is American Traffic Solutions, or ATS, which is headquartered in Arizona. It was first incorporated in Kentucky in 2008, but allowed its incorporation to lapse in 2016. However, they have now reincorporated in 2017 and are currently active in the state. Is this coincidence that they're reincorporated to do business in Kentucky, with House Bill 201 being introduced and pending passage by the legislature? Another company, Conduit, is a corporation headquartered in New Jersey. I found no record of whether they have incorporated in Kentucky as of the taping of this podcast. Another similar company is Redflex Traffic Systems. This is an Australian-based corporation and has a global reach. They operate globally. And one of their partners includes Chinatel Group in communist mainland China. The company has been the subject of bribery investigations in March 2013, according to the Chicago Tribune, involving the city of Chicago. There's no record found of any active corporation under this name being registered in Kentucky. A fourth group, Census Gotso Group, is a Massachusetts corporation. Again, no record of them being registered in Kentucky as the taping of this podcast. And lastly, I found that Xerox State and Local Solutions was incorporated to do business in Kentucky as of 2016, but is currently not an active registered corporation. The question that comes to mind again, following the money. Are there executives of these or similar companies whose business is the management, installation, and processing of traffic tickets generated by traffic cameras, making donations to members of the legislature, or being politically active in the state? And are they gearing up for business in Kentucky, donating or hiring lobbying firms to lobby in support of this bill? Again, follow the money. Let's move on to the crux of this issue with House Bill 201, and that is its unconstitutional nature. First and foremost, the use of traffic ticket cameras raises concerns, several questions about their constitutionality, with evidence clearly pointing to their use as being unconstitutional. Many parts of the federal Constitution come into conflict with the use of traffic ticket cameras. Sections dealing with due process and illegal search and seizure, for starters. Many legal challenges exist from other states about the use of traffic ticket cameras, and they have been the subject of continuing legal challenges, with opponents arguing that they violate several constitutional rights. The first of these is the violation of due process. These traffic ticket cameras may violate the due process clause of the U.S. Constitution's 14th Amendment by denying drivers the opportunity to confront their accuser and to have their day in court. Some argue that receiving a ticket in the mail without ever being pulled over by a police officer and without the ability to dispute the ticket in court may deprive the driver of their right to due process. Another violation centers on the Sixth Amendment. The use of these cameras violates that amendment's confrontation clause, which guarantees defendants the right to face their accuser. Since the camera is the accuser, drivers may not have the opportunity to cross-examine the camera or challenge the evidence the camera has produced against them. It obviously also gets into violations of equal protection. There are arguments that traffic cameras violate the Equal Protection Clause, again, of the 14th Amendment by treating drivers differently depending on whether they are caught by a camera or by a police officer. Critics of these cameras suggest that this inconsistency creates a disparity that violates equal protection under the Constitution. And then we get into the violation of the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure. The U.S. Constitution protects us against unreasonable search and seizure. Some argue that the use of traffic cameras violate this right by indiscriminately capturing images of the vehicles, regardless of whether a driver has committed a traffic violation or not. Overall, opponents of traffic cameras argue that their use undermines basic constitutional rights, while supporters claim they are a useful tool for improving public safety on the roads. Folks, due process is a fundamental right guaranteed to us by the 14th Amendment of the federal Constitution, the supreme law of the land, is it? And it requires that the government provide fair and impartial procedures for enforcing the law. When it comes to traffic cameras, the process of issuing a ticket is often automated. It lacks the opportunity for drivers to contest that ticket in court or present evidence in their defense. This raises questions about the fairness of the process and whether these processes violate the constitutional right to due process. There have been several legal cases that have challenged this constitutionality of traffic ticket cameras in various jurisdictions across the United States, including neighboring states like Illinois and Ohio. Here, we have some of the more prominent examples of cases that have successfully challenged the use of traffic cameras. First of those is a 2014 case involving the city of Chicago versus Morales. In this case, the Illinois Supreme Court held that Chicago's red light camera ordinance was invalid because it delegated too much discretion to a private contractor to decide which violations to enforce. The court found that the ordinance violated the due process rights of motorists because it did not provide adequate notice of the violation, and it did not give motorists a meaningful opportunity to challenge the ticket. Another example of a case that has been successfully argued against the use of cameras is a 2016 case in the city of Dayton versus Erickson. In this case, the Ohio Supreme Court held that Dayton's traffic camera ordinance was unconstitutional because it deprived motorists of their right to confront their accusers in court. The court found that the ordinance violated the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution because it allowed a machine to testify against a defendant without the defendant having the ability to cross-examine the machine. We go on. 2017, Brown versus the city of Yakima. In this case, the Washington State Supreme Court held that Yakima's traffic ordinance was unconstitutional in the use of cameras because it violates the state's uniform traffic control law. The court found in Washington that the ordinance conflicted with state law because it did not require a police officer to be present at the time of the violation, as state law requires. We go on. 2018, the city of Des Moines versus Jacobson. In this case, the Iowa Supreme Court held that Des Moines' traffic camera ordinance was unconstitutional because it violated the state's Equal Protection Clause. The court found that the ordinance treated similarly situated motorists differently by imposing different penalties for the same offense, depending on whether the violation was captured by a camera or observed by a police officer. In 2019, the city of St. Louis versus Beekman stated in the Missouri Court of Appeals that St. Louis's traffic ordinance was unconstitutional, once again, because it violated the state's due process clause. The court found that the ordinance did not provide adequate notice of the violation and did not give motorists a meaningful opportunity to challenge the ticket, all in violation of their due process rights. I found another example from 2014 in which the Maryland Court of Appeals ruled that the use of speed cameras in Baltimore was unconstitutional because the city did not provide drivers with sufficient notice of the cameras. The court found the lack of notice and limited opportunity for drivers to contest the tickets violated their due process rights. This case sets precedent for the unconstitutional use of traffic cameras in the state of Maryland. As we know, the use of traffic cameras raises privacy concerns in addition to our constitutional rights concerns. The cameras capture images of drivers and their vehicles, which can be used to track their movements and activities. This raises questions about the government's use of this information and whether it's being used for purposes beyond enforcing traffic laws. This invades the privacy of drivers and raises serious concerns about the government overreach and the abuse of power. And we all know that there are no instances, right, of the government overreaching and abusing its power. Additionally, the use of traffic ticket cameras violates the right to face your accuser in court. As we mentioned, the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution guarantees us the right to confront witnesses and to present evidence in one's own defense. This right is essential to ensuring a fair trial and protecting the rights of the accused. When it comes to traffic ticket cameras, drivers are often not able to confront the person who issued the ticket or to present evidence in their own defense. This violates the right to face one's accuser in court and undermines the fairness of the legal process. So it raises the question as we move on today, is Kentucky once again behind the curve on public policy? When researching this episode, it's interesting to note that Kentucky could be once again behind the public policy curve in relation to what other states are doing on this issue, as it seems to be on many others. While Kentucky is now moving to begin expanding and encouraging the use of traffic ticket cameras, other states, including neighboring states, are moving to undo their use of traffic cameras by introducing and enacting legislation that bans their use, based on many of the reasons mentioned as to why this is a bad policy path for Kentucky to embark upon. Here are some examples of this fact that this is bad public policy and equally bad law should this be enacted. Most bans have occurred within the last few years. For example, in 2017, Iowa's Governor Terry Branstad signed a bill banning the use of traffic cameras for traffic enforcement on Iowa's highways and interstates. The law allowed cities and counties to continue the use of cameras for traffic enforcement on local roads, but imposed greater and more certain criteria that included conducting a traffic engineering study to justify the need for those cameras on those local roads. This ban was implemented due to concerns about due process, accuracy of the cameras, and the motivation of cities to use them to generate revenue rather than improve safety. In 2019, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a bill banning red light cameras in the state. The law allowed cities and counties to continue operating existing cameras until their contracts expired, but prohibited the renewal or extension of those contracts. The ban was implemented due to concerns about privacy violations, due process, and the accuracy of the cameras. In 2019, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine signed a bill banning the use of red light cameras in the state. The law took effect in March 2020 and required all red light camera programs to be shut down by July 2020. The ban was implemented due to concerns about due process, accuracy of the cameras, and motivation of cities to use them to generate revenue and not about safety. In New Hampshire in July of 2019, Governor Chris Sununu signed a bill banning the use of red light cameras and speed cameras in the state. The law took effect January of 2020 and required all existing cameras to be removed in the state by the end of the year. The ban was implemented due to concerns, again, due process, privacy violations, and the accuracy of the cameras. In May 2019, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill banning the use of red light cameras in the state. The bill took effect in July 2021 and required all existing cameras to be moved by the end of that year. The ban was implemented, you guessed it, over concerns about privacy violations, due process, and the accuracy of the cameras. Do we see a pattern here? Is this really for your safety? As a last point, the original point of House Bill 201 was being promoted as a safety measure. In closing, let's examine that very point. Is the use of these cameras really for our safety, or could it be that it is a revenue generation machine for the government? I point to two studies that suggest that predictably the argument it increases our safety fails when one considers that the byproduct of these safety measures is the resulting increase in certain traffic accidents. These studies suggest an increase in rear-end collisions due to the use of traffic cameras. Included here are two examples of such research from California and Virginia on this point. A study published in the journal Transportation Safety and Security in 2013 found in California, after examining the effects of red light cameras on traffic safety there, the study found that while the cameras reduced the number of red light violations and right angle crashes, they also led to an increase in rear end collisions. Researchers suggested that this increase in rear end crashes may be due to drivers stopping abruptly to avoid a violation or to decrease in the yellow light duration that gives drivers less time to react. Another study in the state of Virginia, more recently, a 2017 study published in the Journal of Safety Research, analyzed the effect of speed cameras on traffic safety there. That study found that the use of speed cameras was associated with a significant increase in rear end crashes. The researchers suggested that this increase may be due to drivers slowing down abruptly when they see the cameras, or to a change in driver behavior because of the cameras. While it's important to note that not all studies have found an increase in rear end crashes due to traffic ticket cameras, these studies and others show that some show a decrease in crashes. But as we see from anecdotal evidence and from these two studies in large states and heavily populated areas, it is suggested that these cameras do not increase safety. Rather, they increase the potential for a rear end collision. I would finally like to note that the use of traffic cameras is often motivated by financial considerations rather than a simple desire to promote greater public safety. The primary motivator upon examination appears for state and local governments is to implement the use of these cameras in order to generate additional revenue from traffic violations more efficiently. From their typical installation locations at intersections and other high traffic areas, where they capture images of vehicles violating traffic laws, such as running red lights or exceeding speed limits. The fines collected from these violations provide an easy source of revenue for state and local government, and this should be frankly discussed. By using these traffic cameras, state and local governments can enforce traffic laws with greater efficiency and without the need for as many law enforcement personnel. This allows them to issue more tickets and collect more fines than would be possible through traditional means currently using human intelligence and police officers in order to issue these citations. And they do so by being able to lower their overhead, maintain the enforcement mechanism, which is where the private contractor scenario further enhances that margin of profit. Once again, here are specific examples of increased revenue due to the use of traffic cameras that can be found through simple research. Let's start with New York City, the largest city in the country. In 2019, New York City generated $28.5 million in revenue from traffic cameras, which was up from $17 million in 2015, just 4 years earlier. The city has installed over 200 speed cameras in school zones across the 5 boroughs of New York City. The nation's capital, well, it's not missing out on the revenue. In 2018, the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., collected $150 million in revenue from traffic cameras. The city has over 1,000 cameras installed throughout the city, which capture images of drivers who run red lights or exceed speed limits. The Windy City of Chicago in 2019 generated $61 million in revenue from traffic cameras. The city has installed over 400 red light cameras at intersections throughout the city. On the West Coast in Los Angeles, in 2019, they generated $139 million in revenue from traffic cameras. The city has over 180 cameras installed at intersections throughout the city, which capture images of drivers who run red lights or exceed speed limits. So you see, government clearly sees the financial benefit of deploying traffic cameras as a source of revenue rather than a tool to enforce traffic laws and promote road safety. This raises serious questions about the reasoning for their use, expansion, and rapid growth and integration into law enforcement. While their constitutionality is a prime point of concern, the deployment and increased use based on revenue increases suggests that the government is motivated more by profit than public safety. Today, her focus has been on House Bill 201 in the Kentucky General Assembly and the implementation of a pilot program to test the use of traffic ticket cameras for public safety in highway construction zones. It is my opinion that these cameras and their expanded use is unconstitutional and is motivated by the desire to increase government profit rather than public safety. Over the past few years, we have witnessed a rapid expansion and increased use of these cameras across the country, which has not only led to an erosion of our constitutional rights and individual liberties, but has also contributed to the growth in the size of government and a massive increase in government revenue. The use of traffic cameras has led to significant expansion of the size of government. Many municipalities have hired additional staff to manage these cameras, which has led to an increase in government spending. In addition, the use of these cameras has also led to the creation of new government agencies, which are responsible for overseeing and managing these cameras. This has led to an increase in the number of government employees overall, as they have more revenue, further exacerbating the growth of the scope and size of government. Secondly, the use of traffic cameras has led to a substantial increase of revenue for local municipalities. While the proponents of these cameras argue that they are a necessary tool for promoting public safety, the reality is that they are often used as revenue-generating machines. The fines collected increase dramatically once the cameras are deployed, from traffic violations being caught by these cameras, and some municipalities relying on this revenue to fund their overall budgets. This creates a perverse incentive to issue as many tickets as possible, which can lead to abuses of power by those in charge of managing these cameras. Perhaps the most concerning issue with the use of traffic cameras is the erosion of our constitutional rights and individual liberties. The use of these cameras violates several key provisions of the U.S. Constitution, including the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable search and seizure. The use of these cameras allow law enforcement to conduct surveillance on citizens without a warrant or probable cause, which is a clear violation of our constitutional rights. Moreover, the use of these cameras creates a culture of surveillance and paranoia where citizens are constantly monitored and recorded. This creates an atmosphere of distrust between citizens and law enforcement and their government, which can further exacerbate tensions between these groups. Additionally, the use of these cameras can lead to the wrongful conviction of innocent individuals, as the cameras are not always accurate, and there is no way to cross-examine the camera in court. In conclusion, the use of traffic ticket cameras is a clear violation, in my opinion, of our constitutional rights and our individual liberties, and it's more about money than safety. It has led to an increase in the size of government where they're used. It is increasing revenue for municipalities, and it erodes our fundamental freedoms. We must take action to ensure that our government respects our constitutional rights and does not violate our constitutional liberties and rights in the name of public safety. This has been the latest episode of Kentucky Crossroads, and the topic has been House Bill 201 and the use of traffic ticket cameras. Is it bad policy for Kentucky? You decide. I'm Roger Ford for Kentucky Crossroads. As always, God bless you and your family. God bless our Commonwealth, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to Kentucky Crossroads with Roger Ford. Be sure to join us for our next weekly episode, where we'll discuss the issues, history, and culture that makes Kentucky such a unique place in our country. Kentucky Crossroads is broadcast on Southern Cloud